Good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well and safe in the comfort of your homes. I welcome you today on behalf of the Progressive Students Forum to this lecture. Today, the topic of discussion will be the attack on minorities in contemporary India and the future of secularism. I am Zeba Patel, a member of the executive body of the Progressive Students Forum and a student at Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, pursuing my master's in public health in social epidemiology. This lecture is being conducted by Progressive Students Forum, which is an student-led initiative at Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai. The Progressive Student Forum has been working diligently to create a secular, democratic space as well for everyone, as well as to inculcate the values of inclusive and rational thinking. The lecture is being conducted out to serve the same very purpose today. The systematic surge in religious fundamentalism and the increasing attack on minorities in the country today by the ruling party has posed a grave barrier in the democratic ethos of our constitution. The curbing of minority rights, either through tools like the CAA, which is the Citizenship Amendment Act, which will be completing its 2 years on the same day today, or various anti conversion laws led to increase attacks on minorities, like the increased vandalism on churches in across various states in the country, or attack on a bangle seller in Indore due to his religious identity. These pose a grave threat and are issues of concern. We at the Progressive Students Forum, who will be completing our 10 years of anniversary in 2022, recognize the importance of addressing this and discussing the constructs and implications of these issues in the present time. The speakers today for our session are Dr. S. Irfan Habib and Subhashini Ali Ma'am. The chairing of this session would be done by Fatima Sultana, who is also the General Secretary of the Progressive Students Forum. We would like to welcome our speakers today and extend our gratitude to them. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you, Zeba. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. And myself, Fatima Sultana, currently second year master student at TIS Mumbai. Also, I'm the General Secretary of Progressive Students Forum. Since Zeba has already given a brief idea about the panel discussion about the topic and why we are conducting the session today, I'm not going to elaborate or dive into the topic. And moreover, that we are honored to have the best speakers to talk about the same at this important juncture. And before the panel discussion starts, I would like to introduce both of the speakers. Firstly, we have Comrade Subhashini Ali, who is currently the Vice President of All India Democratic Women's Association, AIDWA, and who is also Politburo member of CPIM. And Comrade Subhashini Ali is a former member of Parliament from Kanpur constituency from Uttar Pradesh. And beyond her profile as a former MP, she has been working dedicatedly on the issue of violence against minorities and actively mobilizing women across the nation for more than 4 decades, and that too from a state like Uttar Pradesh, and who is having a very deep experience of mobilizing people in the ground. And secondly, we have Dr. S. Irfan Habib, who is one of the leading intellectuals presently in the country. And I think to the people who are associated with the academic space, they doesn't need an introduction about the Dr. Habib's speech and his works. And I think before today's event, the students of TISS also got an opportunity to listen to his speech when he was a guest at Mumbai Collective during past 3 years when Mumbai Collective was happening. And Dr. Irfan Habib also a noted historian of science and public intellectual and an author. He was also a former faculty of National Institute of Science, Technology and Development Studies. And he held the post of Abdul Kalam Azad Chair at the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi. And he has written prolifically on communalism, revolutionary stance in the independence movement, and social history of science. His major works include Inqulab, Bhagat Singh on religion and revolution, and To Make the Deaf Hear ideology and program of Bhagat Singh and his comrades. I have on behalf of PSF, I would like to welcome both of you to the session today. And the structure of our event is going to be like Dr. Habib would talk first for 30 minutes, and Comrade Subhashini Ali would follow after that. And after finishing both of their speeches, that platform will be open to discuss the question answer. And whoever having the questions to the speakers could post their questions in the comment box given below, that we will take into the speakers and we can discuss over that. So I'm not going to elaborate much. Dr. Habib sir, yeah, you can.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Fatima, and thank you, TISS and PSF for inviting me to speak along with our senior comrade Subhashini Ali, whom we all venerate and look up to. The subject we are going to discuss this evening is a subject which bothers most of us, at least those who are sensitive to living happily together, and who have always look up to the opportunities to bring people together. All those people are deeply disturbed, and we see this divisive politics being played, the politics of hate being played around us almost every day, especially in our parts of India where we live, Delhi, around the so-called Hindi belt, as we call it. Before I come to the issues which we are all facing today and which has brought us together to speak and discuss the matter, I would like to go back to the history a little bit, because I just finished a book on Maulana Azad, and I dealt with in detail lots of issues which we confront in today's India. I'm saying this because if you go back and try to see 1920s, 30s, and 40s, I see large number of things which we are facing today were actually happening then. The beginnings were in 1920s, 1930s, 40s. All these 3 decades, particularly, were totally stuck by this virus of communalism, virus of divisiveness. It is quite often, and I've tried to point out in my book as well, that our nationalist leaders who gave us this whole idea of compositeness of India, composite nationalism of India, indivisible nationalism of India, all those people went through a churning, and after the deep churning, this whole idea of compositeness, of eclectic nationalism came about. Now, this is something so amazing that our great leaders from Gandhi to Sardar Patel to Jawaharlal Nehru and Maulana Azad and so many others, all of them actually have to fight a battle at two fronts. They had to fight against the British and they had to fight against the communal forces, both Hindu and Muslim. So it was a battle on two fronts. So you can imagine how difficult the task was. So it is not actually the difficult task we are facing today. Our leaders, from whom we inherited this independent India, who gave us this independent India after battling the British, they confronted the similar forces in their times when they were fighting the British to liberate India from colonialism. Now, the Hindu and Muslim communalism, both of them were a threat to composite India in those times. And Maulana actually has written somewhere in his Al-Hilal or in other writings which I came across, he said, we can understand Muslim communalism, Muslim separatism, because Muslim League wants to create a Pakistani a nation based on two-nation theory, a country based on Islam, which he questioned in his own ways. But I don't understand why Hindu communalism is on the rise. Why Hindu communalism actually is trying to weaken our composite nationalism, our fight against the British. What is their agenda? So he could not really understand why the Hindu communalists who call themselves nationalists today, why were they trying to weaken the nationalism in those times? Talking in terms of divisive politics, hate politics, identifying a section of their own population as enemies of the nation, defining nation and nationalism. And I'm saying this, it is all very relevant in the context of CAA, in the context of the whole identity politics which is being played out, in the context of convergence bogey which is being raised, in the context of all sorts of politics, which we are witnessing today. The background, we need to understand how it began and why it has acquired such an important or strong position politically in our lives today. Why it is worrying? Because it has very deep roots. It took almost 70 years of nurturing, because from 1925 onwards, formally, the RSS, when the RSS was founded, and from 1922-23, when Vinayak Savarkar wrote his Hindutva, all that agenda, the manifesto, the real manifesto, could not be taken up seriously. Now the time has come, unfortunately, when that agenda can be put to great use by them, and we can see how it is being put to use. That is something which is actually worrying us, most of us, and that's why we are here to discuss the issue. I want to raise the historical background to all this, because it didn't really happen overnight. It had its past, it had its historical past, and that's why it could happen so in such a smooth way, because a mere change of government electorally did not really bring this about. It happened because the roots of ideological transformation were quite strongly being cultivated for years, and there was a section already ready to take it up and implement it whenever the opportunity comes. And when the opportunity came, they really took it up seriously. Now, what we see today is actually an open threat to our social fabric, and most of the minorities, I'm not talking of just Muslims, the Christian minorities are living under severe, terrible fear. The change which has come about in these years, because people say that, and the ruling parties, activists often say, and Comrade Subhashini must be listening to it quite often, that communalism was not something which came with Narendra Modi or with the BJP government. It was there much before. And nobody disagrees with that. No, for me, who comes from a city like Meerut, which has a history of communalism, and we have seen curfews for 2 months, 3 months, confined in our homes, terrible violence all around, Maliana to Hashimpura, and all sorts of things happened, all during other governments, not BJP. But the difference is that such violences, such happenings, unfortunate killings, etc., they used to happen, and the city used to come back to normal, after a while. And there was as if nothing had happened. Within a month or two, things used to be normal. Today, there is no violence, but there is violence. Like many times, it is claimed that there are no communal riots. No, the point is the harassment, the identification of people, the day-to-day fear, the threat to livelihoods. This is something which is absolutely new. There was no threat to livelihoods of people. Like for Muslims, if you look at the Muslim community, most of them are self-employed. Most of them are not very well educated. They are all skilled labor, skilled working class. They are great. They are wonderfully skilled people who can do wonders, and they have been doing it in different areas. But today, their livelihoods are threatened because they are identified as a community belonging to a particular religion. So they don't really get, well, I've heard many people talking to me as well, that they don't get jobs the way they used to get earlier. So these are threats. Look at the whole issue around eating habits. People are being targeted in Gujarat. We see it happening in the past. We saw it happening in the past 1 week. How a non-vegetarian stalls, etc., the sellers of non-vegetarian food were hounded by police, and fortunately, the court came out in support of the vendors. That how you cannot really decide the eating habits of people. No, you have no right to decide what one has to eat and what not. So there are some instances where courts come out in support of people, and that also is not very often. Many times courts also disappoint us. But these are times when such issues are being raised, and so lives are under threat, livelihoods are under threat, and I will not talk about all sorts of other things which we all see. There is no need of repeating it. And in the recent past 1 week, we have seen how the attack on churches and schools. Forget about church. A school in Madhya Pradesh where children were studying in the classes were brutally attacked, stone pelted. So this is something which never happened before. This is something very exclusively happening during these times. So these are awfully different times. So you cannot really compare that what is happening today actually had been happening in India for ages. Like as Maulana Azad said, there is fight between brothers in a family. But after that fight, we all get together and get back to our lives. So similarly, the communities have been living together. There have been differences, but we resolve them and get back to our lives. But today, that resolution of issues is under danger, under threat. That has become a permanent fixture of our lives. Permanent threat to our lives. So that is a difference, and it is happening in such a sophisticated manner that you cannot even imagine as if something bad is being done to you, because you listen to all sorts of slogans and commitments from the Prime Minister himself, where he vouches for everybody's sabka saath, sabka vishwas, sabka vikas. So all that keeps happening. But besides that, along with that, we see what is happening at the ground level, and there is no reaction. There is no comment from higher ups in the government. Many times we see the government actually coming in support, or the government people responsible in the government coming in support of all those who are indulging in this brutal othering of their own fellow citizens. So this is something which is very, very unusual for these times, which has happened only recently in the past few years. And my another fear is that because of all this, we have actually lost quite a lot of moral authority, because despite the fact that we faced violence, communal violence in the country off and on, we still saw ourselves as a secular nation, as a nation which was committed to pluralism, committed to democratic functioning, committed to happily living together, despite differences, despite occasional violence. So on that count, we could take moral high position in our South Asian region, because what used to happen in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and which continues to happen even now, we could talk with a high moral position that what are you doing to your minorities? No, you need to really look after them. Today, we have lost quite a lot of that moral strength of actually commenting upon the bad situation in Pakistan and Bangladesh. That is something very, very, very unfortunate, which we have lost, which we shouldn't have lost, because we are a democratic country. Even in 1947, when we decided to be a secular country, in the midst of huge pressures from the Hindu fundamentalist groups, the groups which have become so vocal now, and they are empowered now. The same groups actually lost the battle in 1947, and because they wanted to create a mirror image of Pakistan in India by creating a India Hindu nation. So that opportunity which they lost in 1947 has come back to them after 70 years. So in this situation, it is really awful that we cannot even raise our voice in support of minorities in Pakistan and Bangladesh, because what happened in Bangladesh recently, I saw on social media, lots of people commented that what right do we have to talk about the defense of minorities in Bangladesh, because when we treat our own minorities so shabbily. So that is something which we have lost, something very precious, which we had earned through our goodwill in the world, in the region, and through our performance as a democratic country. That particular strength we have lost. And that is something which I feel is not very easy to regain, because that is something which we earned through our, not after independence, we earned in the pre-independence days. From 1930s, 40s onwards, we were known as a country which was fighting against the divisive forces world over, the fascist forces world over. Nehru was known for it. He traveled around even before independence, speaking against the fascist forces. So we had that reputation, which we carried with us into independent India, and cultivated it for several decades, and quite successfully, despite our occasional violence, in the communal violence and caste violence as well. But that remained only a very, very limited sort of. We could see it as an aberration, but today it's no more an aberration. It is something which we are living in our lives every day, and that is a great fear. Now, instead of going into all those instances, I've given you a few this thing. The danger to secularism, the second part of it, I don't see the danger of secularism is only because minorities are under threat. Of course, that is a major component of it. Secularism is dear not only to needed not only by the minorities. It is needed by most right-thinking citizens of this country, and it has nothing to do with their religion. A secular Hindu, an open, plural Hindu who thinks in terms of living happily together, needs secularism as badly or as desperately as any Muslim or Christian. Of course, his life may not be under threat today, but it may be under threat maybe a few years later, because for the fascist forces, communal forces, the enemy actually comes as an enemy to their idea of India, what they perceive as idea of India, and not really their religion. So a secular non-Muslim or any citizen of this country who believes in pluralism, secularism, etc., has to be under threat. He's already under threat, but the threat will be much more in the coming times if we don't really take care to fight these forces the way we should. So for me, and I often raise this with people, because generally it is said that the defense of secularism actually is a responsibility of minorities alone, and I most of the time pointed out that actually the defense of secularism or the fight for secularism is actually carried out more effectively by a non-Muslim. I'm not saying that a Muslim or a Christian should not fight for it. It is actually his or her belief. But a secular Hindu, somebody from the majority who believes that secularism is intrinsic to our democratic functioning, can fight this battle more effectively. And we have seen this. We have large number of secular political organizations, fronts, leaders who actually articulate the cause of secularism, which we see as something which gives comfort to minorities, to Christians and Muslims, etc. And I don't say that it doesn't give, but the point is, a secular character, which was enshrined in our constitution, which we won through our battle against the British, as a fight of our freedom for several decades. See, it was an inheritance which came to us after that battle. We rejected communalism, both Hindu and Muslim, in 1947, created a progressive, a forward-looking, democratic, secular India, and we all cherish those values which we inherited. The point is that those values which we cherish, those values which we inherited, are under severe threat. And secularism is one of the most important, most vulnerable parts of our constitution, which is into all sorts of like, to call yourself a secular is also actually mocked about by people. You can't even talk about secularism in public. Many times when I speak, I always feel that let me use some other word. Let me use some, and I often do find some other word for, because secularism has become something as if you are trying to very something which has lost its meaning, which is no more relevant in this country. You don't really have to talk about secularism. What is it? Is there something outdated? So that is the feeling which has been created in the past 7 years, and through a very, very vicious campaign and that campaign we need to counter. And I'm really grateful. I mean, about people like me who can do that only through our writings, which we keep doing. I've used Bhagat Singh to counter this communal virus several times, and try to tell people what sort of India Bhagat Singh conceived for us, and in which secularism was a major component. Subhash Chandra Bose's secularism was inherent in his writings, in his speeches. If you go and read them in 1920s and in 1930s, you cannot celebrate them as mere as nationalists. No, their martyrdom is not enough. No. Of course, we respect that, but you need to go back to their idea of India, which they stood for, and that is something which I feel, and I'm finishing it. This is something which is under threat, and we need to go back and defend it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. And now we have Comrade Subhashni Ali, who is here to talk on the topic.
I hope you can hear me, because
yes, you are.
Where I am, I can hardly hear you. I could hardly hear what Professor Habib said, and I'm sitting in Shimla, you see, so maybe that's the reason.
Okay. Over to you, comrade. You can go.
So you can hear me, right?
Yes. You
okay. So I'm not going to repeat much of what Professor Habib has said. Actually, I'm going to speak about another aspect of this whole problem. I would like to say at the outset that attacks on minorities are not something that we are seeing only after 2014. We have been seeing attacks on minorities and minority rights right from the pre-independence era right till today, irrespective of whether the BJP was in power or somebody else was in power. But certainly something has changed. And I think that we have to be more aware of what has changed, what is the new situation in which these attacks are taking place, and what is the agenda behind these attacks. Now, I feel that attacks on minorities are not the result of some permanent hatred between communities, but basically these attacks are engineered by vested interests who always benefit from people, divided, people hating each other, people resorting to violence against each other. And obviously, the minorities have to face the brunt of this violence and also the brunt of the injustice that accompanies this violence, that is communal violence. So this is, as I said, something that we have been seeing because we live in a society that is divided on the basis of class also, where vested interests have tremendous power. They control the state to a large extent, the administration, and the engineering of communal violence is also done actually to further their interests. Now, having said that, I would like to stress that what we are seeing from 2014 onwards is certainly something different because the context has changed. We have a government, of course, which is committed to economic inequality, class inequality. It is committed to the interests of the corporate sector. All that is true, but it is also a government that is controlled by the RSS. And the RSS, from the time that the Constitution of India was passed in 1949, has actually never accepted this constitution. they have always opposed it. So I would say that they are different from all the other political streams and political groups that we have in our country. Almost all the other political groups and political formations have their history in anti imperialist struggle. They have all been part of the anti British struggle, and all of them, to some extent or the other, accept and respect the Constitution. They may uh, they may accept certain parts of it more than other parts. They may not be committed to gender justice or caste justice or class justice, but they do have some sense of acceptance as far as the Constitution is concerned. But when we come to the RSS, as far back as 1949, the RSS had declared in no uncertain terms that they do not accept the Constitution of India. They do not accept the Constitution that was, to a very large extent, the result of the labors of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. They said at that time that we don't see the need for this Constitution because in our country, in India, we have an ancient uh, book of laws. We have an ancient book of, you can say, even religious laws, which is the Manusmriti. And they said that we feel that the Manusmriti is all that India needs. That should be our book of laws, not this constitution. So here we have a political grouping which has opposed the constitution tooth and nail from its very inception. And today, since 2014, they have been in power. I mean, a political grouping, the BJP, which is controlled and directed by the RSS, has been in power at the center, and they are also in power in many of the states of our country. So that is why I feel that we have to understand what their agenda is. Their agenda goes much beyond an agenda of communal polarization. Their agenda is not one of simply attacking the minorities and reducing them to second class citizens. Their agenda is much bigger than this. And unless we are able to make people understand what their agenda is, we are not going to be able to fight their attacks in the way that we should. In fact, today, we should take inspiration from the victorious Kisan struggle, because that struggle, which lasted for more than 1 year, with people sitting in the cold and the heat and the rain and fighting for their demands, that was a struggle that went beyond a struggle just to repeal 3 laws. They were very conscious of the fact that they were fighting for the constitution, they were fighting against communal polarization, they were fighting against divisive tactics, they were in fact fighting against the whole arsenal of weapons that the BJP and the Sangh Parivar uses to divide our people to further its larger agenda. So the Kisans were every day more and more conscious of this big battle that they were fighting, and that is why they could succeed. That is why they were victorious, because they understood what they were fighting and they preserved their unity. They fought against all attempts to divide them. They stood firm. They could not be shaken, and ultimately they won and they have gone home victorious. Now, what do we learn from this? We have to learn that when we talk about the BJP attacking minorities, yes, it attacks minorities. And it attacks minorities not only because it is a communal organization. I would like to say that when we talk about communalism, that communalism is also a weapon of the ruling class to divide the people who are being exploited. And in that sense, of course, the BJP is like other ruling class parties, but it is relying on communal polarization to a much greater extent than any other political party. It relies on this for a number of reasons. For one thing, it follows an ideology that denies religious minorities equal rights. Not only did they oppose the Constitution of India, but the RSS Sangh Parivar also subscribes to Savarkar's theories of Hindutva, and that theory underlines the fact that people belonging to the religious minorities can never be treated as equal citizens in this country. And that is why, of course, we see a certain uh, pattern in the attacks to which the minorities are being to which they are being subjected under the BJP rule. Now, here I would like to say that this communal polarization, for one thing, of course, they do not accept religious minorities as equal citizens. But apart from that, it furthers their larger agenda to continue dividing people on religious lines, to deepen the communal divide, to deepen communal polarization. It helps them politically and it furthers their larger agenda. Now, why am I saying this? I'll just give you one or two examples. And one is, for example, the whole laws and their attacks in the name of the cow, in the name of cow protection. Now, we know the cow is not being protected. In fact, possibly the cow is suffering more under this regime than it did earlier, but that's another issue. Of course, the members of the Muslim community face the most vicious attacks as people who are stealing cows, who are slaughtering cows, who eat cows, etc., etc. So they are certainly targeted. But the larger attack in the name of cow protection is against all those whose livelihood is very much bound up with the cattle trade. And here I would like to remind you that whether it is workers in the tannery or whether it is workers in the meat trade, the vast majority are not Muslims. The vast majority are Dalits. And it is Dalits who have lost their livelihood to the largest extent because of these policies and these laws. Not only that, I would also like to remind you that the whole attack on the meat trade has benefited big exporters of beef, and many of them belong to the BJP. They own very modern abattoirs, and today India is the biggest exporter of beef in the country. So their agenda in the name of cow protection has had many results. It has resulted in attacks and vicious attacks and even life taking, murderous attacks on Muslims. It has resulted in huge loss of livelihood for Dalits. It has also resulted in phenomenal profits of beef exporters, many of whom belong to the BJP, who now have a monopoly as far as the sale and the trade in various kinds of cattle are concerned. And it has also destroyed the livelihood of farmers who cannot protect their crops against the marauding herds of cows that are roaming around the countryside. So what I'm trying to say is that what appears to be an attack on minorities is actually a multi-pronged attack on many, many sections of working people, many sections of the exploited, including peasantry, and also directly benefits one section of the ruling class, one section of the corporates, that is meat exporters. This is one example I'm trying to give you of the way in which the BJP attack on minorities actually pans out, having a much, much wider and greater effect. Now, when we come to the issue of, for example, what they're doing in the name of inter-community marriages, inter-religious marriages, and the laws that have been brought in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and now Karnataka is also bringing it. And of course, we find that Muslim men and their families who are entering into relationships, friendships, or marriages with non-Muslim women, they are being targeted, they are being persecuted, they are being sent to jail. That is certainly true. But I would like to say there is one aspect of these laws that we are not thinking about or not talking about very often, and that is the attack on women's rights. A woman has the right, and it's a hard-won right. It is a right that was won with great difficulty in a society like ours. But an adult woman in India has the right to choose her life partner. It's a hard-won right, and it is a right that thousands and thousands of Indian women are determined to protect, and they are willing to sacrifice a lot to protect this right. It is this right that is also being attacked by the laws that are making inter-community marriages illegal and which are victimizing those who enter into these marriages, the who are, of course, mostly Muslims or anyway non-Hindus entering into these relationships. It is the women who are being denied their right to marriage, their right to choose a life partner. And I would like to say that this is very much part of the BJP Sangh Parivar agenda, because their agenda is very much, as I had said, to uphold the laws of Manu. And if you want to uphold the laws of Manu, then you certainly have to take away the rights of women, especially the rights of women to choose their life partners. Because Manuvad extols the caste system, the Varnashram Dharma system, which rests on the restriction of the way in which marriages are conducted within castes, and it is absolutely essential for a woman to marry within her caste. It is absolutely criminal on the part of the woman to marry someone of a lower caste or of another religion, because that endangers the entire caste system. So I would like to just broaden the scope of what the Sangh Parivar or the RSS-led governments are actually trying to achieve in our country. The attacks on the minorities are actually part of a much larger agenda, and it is that larger agenda that we have to understand. What is the larger agenda? It is not just an attack on secularism, but it is an attack on the constitution itself. And secularism, of course, is a very important pillar of the constitution. We cannot have a democratic constitution. We cannot have a constitution which promises equality to all citizens without the principle of secularism being enshrined in it. But what I would like to say is, and I would like to emphasize is, that the attack of the Sangh Parivar is not only on secularism, but it is on secularism as a pillar of the constitution, because their real attack is on the constitution itself. They are determined to replace this constitution with Manusmriti, with the laws of Manu. The laws that were framed under our constitution are all to be replaced by the laws of Manu. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean only complete denial of rights to the minorities. Of course, that is part of it. The minorities will certainly suffer a complete loss of their rights if this constitution is destroyed and replaced. But who is not going to suffer a loss of rights? The laws of Manu state very clearly that women have no rights at all. Women across castes have no rights at all. The laws of Manu state very clearly that all those who work are Shudras. It goes to the extent of saying that even if upper caste people accept the professions of peasants and workers, that they also lose their position in the caste hierarchy, and they are also to be treated as Shudras who have no rights, whose only duty is to obey the orders of their employers and their masters. So they too stand to lose all their rights as a result of this attack on the constitution. Of course, Dalits will be deprived of all their rights under the laws of Manu. We all know that. But what I would like to emphasize again is that it is not just Dalits and minorities, but it is the vast population of India. It is the vast section of the entire population of India that stands to lose all its rights by this attack on the constitution, which seeks to hollow out the constitution, to make the constitution irrelevant, and to replace it with the laws of Manu. And my dear friends, that is what we have to explain to people. If we want people to stand up for Dalit rights, if we want people to stand up for minority rights, if we want people to stand up for women's rights, if we want people to stand up for workers' rights and peasants' rights, we have to explain that all these rights are interconnected. You cannot have rights for one section of these people without ensuring the rights of all. And it is the rights of all that the BJP today is attacking. And the state itself is spearheading these attacks. Today we find that it is the state, it is the representatives of the government who are themselves voicing their complete approval and their complete support to attacks on minorities, attacks on Dalits, attacks on women, attacks on Kisans, attacks on workers, attacks on the majority of our population. Today I am in Himachal Pradesh. In Himachal Pradesh, most unfortunately, the RSS has inspired a movement demanding a Savarn Ayog. Like we have an SC/ST commission, they are demanding an upper caste commission, a commission to protect the rights of the upper caste. This has been promoted by the RSS, and unfortunately, the Congress party has also supported this movement, and the government of Himachal Pradesh has decided to enact a law to set up such a commission. It may be called a commission of the general caste, or it may be called a commission of the upper caste. That is still being decided. But basically, what is it? It is a commission which is going to oppose the Prevention of Atrocities Act. It is going to oppose all the benefits and all the constitutional guarantees that Dalits have received. And it is going to certainly lead to, as I said, the hollowing out, the process. It is going to add to the process of the hollowing out of the constitution, of the attack on the constitution itself. So these are the various methods being employed. In Gurgaon, we are seeing an attack on the right to pray of minorities. In other states, we are seeing attacks on churches and on schools run by Christian communities. In other states, there are stringent laws being brought in the name of conversion, which are actually going to victimize members and organizations of the religious minorities. But all this is being accompanied by a whole gamut of other laws too. These laws are all being enacted in tandem, and these are all laws that attack the rights of women, attack the rights of workers, peasants, Dalits, Adivasis. Today, the Adivasis are being robbed. Dacoities are being committed. All the environmental laws that had been framed to protect their land rights and forest rights have all been completely rendered null and void, and the habitat of the Adivasis is under attack as never before. So what I would like to stress before all of you is, yes, we have to be concerned about the attacks on minorities. They are outrageous, they are inhuman, they are cruel. There's no doubt about it. And they are state-sponsored. But they are part of a much larger attack on social and economic groups who make up the vast majority of the Indian people. They are attacks that are being made to destroy the Constitution of India and to ensure the rights and privileges of a very small minority of corporates. This is the agenda of the Sangh Parivar that has to be fought and has to be opposed. And that fight can only become a fight that will win, a fight that will include more and more people when the real truth of the attacks on the Constitution are made known by people like us to many other sections of Indian society, many other groups which are still not aware of the dangers that are facing them, the dangers that are increasing every day, the dangers that threaten their right to livelihood, their right to life, their right to equality, their right to equal citizenship, all the rights that are enshrined by our Constitution, which is actually what is under attack. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for such an energetic and lively session, and thank you for elaborating, why the BJP in power with the support of RSS is the need of defending our secular fabric of constitution, and also the women's rights and the Dalit atrocities happening in the country.
Everybody's rights.
What?
It's almost everybody's rights. Only the
yeah.
rights of the few corporates will be protected in future.
Yeah,
that's what Manusmriti is actually.
Yes. So we are going to move to the question answer session, and we are getting also lots of questions in the comment box. I also request to the viewers, whoever having any questions, they can type in the comment box and we will take into the speakers. So first, should I read out the questions loud?
I think Sandipan asked something to me.
Yeah, I'll go with that. We can go ahead with that first.
Yeah.
Would you able to see the question?
Yes, I can. Yes. Yeah, I can read. I've read it already.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just read out loud for the viewers maybe. Thank you, Professor S. Irfan Habib. I have a question in mind. If you can elaborate, do you think secularism defined as multiculturalism and the tolerance of the other is prone to the slip into majoritarianism? He also have a sub question that also I would read out loud. Also, do you see any similarities with the rise of extreme right in the West? How is it similar or different or unrelated altogether? So, for together.
No, no, Sandipan, you're right. When we talk about define secularism as tolerance of each other, I don't see it. I don't see it as something in the right spirit, because tolerance is not enough. To tolerate something, to tolerate somebody, tolerate a particular community is something which you are doing some sort of a favor. You are tolerating someone. You don't like to tolerate, but anyway, you are somehow managing to tolerate. The idea is to respect each other, love each other, respect each other. Because our secularism, it's not like Ashish Nandi and lots of other people, they have been talking about secularism as a Western concept and all that, which is alien to India, Indian culture, Indian civilization. We have Vasudev Kutumbakam, we have so many other names for living together, etc. So I often say that for secularism, because we don't have any other better word to use, we have redefined it. We have redone it for our use. We are not Europe. Europe actually was very different when they defined secularism in their battle against the church. No, so that was a different battle altogether. We haven't fought that battle in this country. We are actually a society with religion, and whether Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or anybody. So for us, religions have to exist. The point is, those people with different religions should live happily together. So that is secularism for us. No, we need to respect each other. So tolerating is not enough. That often turns into majoritarianism, and that's what we are watching. No, we are seeing that happening amongst us these days. So unless we respect, we love each other, we living together separately is not enough. No, that doesn't make any sense. We have to live together with empathy, with care, and which majority of the people in India do. That's why India had been a peaceful society all these years, except for sporadic violence and enmities in sections of our society. Mostly, we have been living together happily. There are so many instances of togetherness we can see. And because India being a vast country and with vast diversities of linguistic and cultural and religious, all sorts of diversities, with these diversities, and this is actually which I often say, and I hope Subhashini will agree, that our weapon against this monster of fascism and communalism is our diversity. That is our strength. And this is what we need to strengthen. If homogenize us, the attempt is to homogenize India into Hindu India with one culture, one book, and one civilization. So that actually is going to kill India. That is something which we need to battle. Our secularism is dependent on the existence of diversities amidst which we have lived all these years. And that is our strength. Thank you.
So we are having another question from Atul Manohar. Any one of the speaker could take that. Recently we have seen many Hindutva ideologues going back and forth about their vision and on inclusion of minorities. For example, Ram Madhav has recently pitched a supposedly inclusive model like integral humanism in his new book Hindutva Paradigm. How should we see this development, and how can this narrative of secularism within the Hindutva fold be countered and defeated? Comrade Subhash, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, but can you just say the question a little loudly? I told you I can't hear. Is it about the Ram Mandir?
No.
No, this is about Ram Madhav. Ram Madhav has come out with a book.
Like secularism within the Hindutva fold. Like I can read it again. Am I audible now?
See, I'll tell you, I can see the question is a very complicated question. I'm not a very academic person, and all of you are academics, and these are the kind of questions that come. But what I would like to say is that Irfan Saab has talked about secularism, but I think one very important aspect of secularism is that it rejects the idea of laws based on religion.
Of course.
Completely on the other side of the spectrum from religious laws. So even if we talk about our after independence, the route that India took, though we may have had a weaker definition of secularism, but what was very important is that we certainly rejected the route of a state based on a religion, on a state religion. I mean, there were many who argued that Pakistan is being created on the basis of Islam. It's a Muslim Rashtra, and India should be a Hindu Rashtra. It should be a nation built on the basis of religious laws, Hindu religious laws. And that was rejected by the people of India, definitely, in the very first general election itself. So I would like to say that that's an aspect of secularism that very often is not spoken about, that secularism rejects religious laws. So therefore, we cannot accept anything coming from the RSS in defense of any kind of secularism, because when they have firmly committed themselves to the establishment of a Hindu Rashtra, when they have committed themselves to the laws of Manu, they can have nothing to do with secularism. It's very clear, and people should understand that. All the sweet talk that they engage in is just nothing but a cover up for what their real intentions are. Any group that believes in a religious law to be applied to all citizens cannot believe in secularism, cannot have anything to do with secularism.
Thank you, comrade. Maybe Dr.
And I
Habib.
would like to say there are also people in India who want India to be secular, but they approve of religious states outside. That's also a form of hypocrisy. And that certainly weakens the battle for secularism within our own country.
Thank you.
You can't approve of secularism in India and approve of an Islamic state or some other kind of religious state outside.
Yes, exactly. Sir, do you want to add more?
Yeah, no. I just want to say that this idea of integral humanism is not something new which Ram Madhav has come out with. This is something which Deen Dayal Upadhyay had talked about. That is his main philosophy, integral humanism. So this is with them for decades. But we see what sort of ideology they propagate. It has nothing to do with integral idea of integral India at all. So it is not new. So I don't think it's going to make any difference at all.
Nothing to do with humanism also.
No, nothing to do with humanism at all. It will. They have lived with this ideology for decades, and you see what they are doing.
If you believe in a basic division of human beings on the basis of religion, then you cannot say that you believe in humanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like we have another question from Bhavya Sudhir. That is a popular narrative post-Babari judgment is that we should make new beginnings and move on. The judicial exercise has also given space to speculation about the impartial way in which the judgment was passed. Will it be wrong to see it as yet another model where the state in institution have been working in tandem to fuel fear psychosis in the minorities by giving preference to public consciousness over rule of the law?
May I reply to that?
Yes, comrade.
See, this is a very important question, and I certainly agree with the sentiments of the questioner. And it is a real blow for all of us that the judiciary, especially under the earlier Chief Justice, succumbed so completely to whatever was demanded of them by the government of the day. It was very apparent that this judgment also was given in accordance with the wishes of the government of the day. And I think that what Mr. Gogoi has been speaking about recently only emphasizes the fact. But what is very tragic is the way in which most political parties, including those who claim to be secular, welcomed the judgment, rushed to welcome the judgment. And I'd like to say that this is something, Irfan Bhai, I'd like to share this with you. This is something that is disturbing. That even on the question of attacks on minorities, I have seen, and I'm proud to say that our party took a very firm stand. We had a day also of protest. And even on the Ayodhya judgment, we had a very critical approach. We criticized that judgment and said it's the end of the case, but it's certainly not the end of the fight for justice. And unfortunately, we were quite isolated because one of the tragedies of the present moment is that secular forces and secular parties also feel very hesitant in taking a firm stand for secularism, against attacks on minorities, and against judgments of this kind. They are now so terrified of losing their votes or their electoral bases that they are willing to compromise on these very crucial issues, which is again a very great danger for the Indian Constitution itself.
Yeah, absolutely right. You can see that happening. I'm extremely disappointed with our own Chief Minister in Delhi. The way he welcomed it, the way he organized a pilgrimage trip for people to Ayodhya. There was
not only your Chief Minister, so many other political parties.
So many others, of course.
Shocking, absolutely.
It is absolutely amazing. You cannot imagine that and these are again very, very hazardous things, which are intrinsic to this electoral democracy in a country like India, where most people are actually vote on the basis of not because they have got a right to elect their government. They elect people with all sorts of objectives, caste, religion.
We don't even know. This is what the leaders are feeling. Whether the people are feeling like that or not, we don't know.
No, but the results, election results, actually have been showing us for the last at least two, 3 elections.
Their fear also creates its own results among the people.
I hope you prove me wrong in the coming elections, and I look forward to
But their actions, unfortunately, create among the people also very wrong notions. That is what is very sad.
It is not just majoritarian politics of BJP. All others have actually joined into this majoritarian concept of
that's what I was trying to say.
All of them.
That is what all of them say.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying. Let's not say all. There are some honorable exceptions.
Most of them. No. I know those exceptions. I know those.
But that's important.
Yeah.
We have we have a number many number of questions incoming, but I think our time is restricted.
Can we have also a limit on how many questions? We can't be here all night. I'm here in another state for some programs.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what
I also have guests in the house, and my people are waiting for dinner.
Okay. We will take 2 more questions and we will end the session.
Okay.
Going to Labib Akhtar questions. The Muslims understand the reason behind their marginalization, but fail miserably to come out of it. Could the eminent and learned speakers shed light of guidance on it? Would it be through socio-political movement, proportionate representation in the parliament, amelioration in socio-economic and educational status, or something else? So,
see, Muslims are being victimized, but this is not a Muslims battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we reduce it to a battle of Muslims, we are going to lose. This is not a battle of Muslims. This is a battle to protect the way of life that we want to protect, the rights of everybody that we want to protect, the constitution that we want to protect. Certainly, the victims, of the most vicious attacks are Muslims and now Christians. But this is not their battle alone. This is a battle of all of us. And if anybody tries to convert it into a battle of a particular religious group or a particular identity, then they are not helping the struggle at all.
Absolutely. Agree with you. Absolutely.
Thank you, comrade. Since we are short of time, I'll just end with one question from my side.
Yeah. Please.
Yes, sure. Has the Congress also perpetrated such attacks on minorities, and do they have a role in enabling the rise of communal forces? Also, is the Congress a trustable force for the people of India?
आप पहले बताइए.
अच्छा, मैं बता दूं. No, see, in today's India, in today's India, the India we live in today, even TMC is seen as a great force, of fighting the communal forces. So for Congress, because the battle is so serious that you have to. I don't undermine whatever the wrongs Congress has committed over the years. Lots of things have happened, and I just hinted a few things which happened during Congress regimes. But the point is that Congress, of course, did not do enough for the upliftment of the minorities, their rights. It didn't really defend it the way it should have done. It was in power for several decades. But despite that, a huge change has happened in the lives of the minority communities. Their economic status. I'm not saying that all of them actually have come out of poverty, but a large section of Muslims. I come from a city which is almost 40% Muslim, and I have seen how people's lives have changed over the years, of a section of Muslims at least. So all that happened during today, in past 7 years. All those people who were happily engaged in some businesses in different sectors, all of them are under fear. Their businesses are under fear. They fear for their lives, for their money, for their economic condition. So all that has changed. So Congress at least provided some semblance of security. I'm not saying total security, but some semblance of security. Could feel that, okay, you can carry on safely and carry on some trade or business, like Subhashini comrade just pointed out about beef trade, etc., about tanneries, etc., where Dalits and Muslims are majorly involved, and it could carry on all these things over the years. But today, and I'm just pointing out these few things. There are so many other sectors where during Congress regimes or during other regional parties in different states, including our CPIM or Samajwadi Party or JD, like Lalu Yadav, etc. in Bihar, people could actually carry on with their lives. All that has become a little difficult today. Not little difficult, quite difficult. And challenges are much more serious. So I don't think there is a comparison between Congress. Congress, their misdeeds, we all know where all they have gone wrong, and that's why we are stuck with this regime. Had everything been fine, we wouldn't have been discussing all these issues today, sitting here.
I think that the Congress record on defense of secularism has been extremely poor, and it has been worsening over the years. Instead of actually gearing up to meet the challenge of the BJP, it seems to be compromising, and that's a very serious problem. It's not something that I want to score political points with. It is something that I wish was not happening, because the battle for the constitution and secularism is much bigger than any one of us. We need to win this battle, and the Congress role has been extremely disappointing. I don't want to say too much more at this stage, but that is certainly what I would like to say. If we see on attacks on minorities, if we see on the Ayodhya judgment, if we see on so many other issues, even the demolition of the mosque, their role in defense of secularism has been extremely poor, extremely disappointing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we are at the end of our session. We are really sorry, the time is very restricted, and we cannot take the entire questions which people have already posted. And here we have Gautam, who is a secretary, one of the secretariat members of Progressive Students Forum, to deliver the vote of thanks. And by Gautam, we will end the session.
Gautam, thank you, Fatima. Yeah, thank you, Professor Habib and Comrade Subhashini. First of all, thank you for joining us and accepting our invitation at the last moment. We know it was, you had a very busy schedule that you took your time out and to join us here. And it's been a very interesting discussion. Although we hope, we hope we could have sort of had more time discussing, because I see like at least 6 to 7 more questions. Maybe we can, we'd love to have you here again. I think a lot of points were discussed, but for me the biggest takeaway among a lot of others is the fact that this fight that we're waging, the secular, progressive, democratic forces are waging, it's not simply an issue of minorities, as very well pointed out by Comrade Subhashini and Professor Habib. It is a fight for everyone. Although there might be forces on both sides of the spectrum who might want to make it an issue simply of minorities, and who might, who have certain vested interest in projecting the issue simply as a question of minorities. I think that's been the biggest takeaway from this. And we really hope we can have you both again at some point. We do conduct more of these events, and we do have to have you, sir, again. And thank you again. Thank you, Professor Habib. Thank you, Comrade Subhashini.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us. Till our next event, see you all. Please take care. Be safe.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.